The Taigan Reservoir in the Belogorsk region of the Crimea, annexed by Russia, has begun to become swampy due to severe shallowing. Local residents told Krym.Realii that many reservoirs in the steppe Crimea are becoming shallow due to the drought. A similar situation is developing in other regions of the Crimean peninsula annexed by Russia. The Taigan Reservoir, located in the Belogorsk region of Crimea, has been shallowing since spring. A local historian speaking to a Krym.Realii correspondent on condition of anonymity suggested that due to the strong and prolonged shallowing, it is undergoing degradation and changes in its ecosystem. Currently, the Taigan Reservoir is experiencing siltation due to its strong shallowing, which increases evaporation, resulting in even more intensive drying of the reservoir. Siltation worsens the availability and very presence of food resources and habitats for the reservoir's fauna. There is a general change in the biota. Biota is a historically formed set of species of living organisms united by a common habita. This will negatively and significantly affect the microclimate of the surrounding area, a decrease in air and soil humidity, a decrease in groundwater, the local historian said. The Russian authorities stopped dumping water from the Taigan Reservoir into the Biota River back in June, when the reservoir had already become very shallow. According to the local historian, since then the water has not been dumped anymore due to the lack of its useful volume in the reservoir. Water discharge from the nearby Belogorsk Reservoir stopped at the end of June, switching the reservoir to accumulation mode as a strategic reserve for the needs of southeastern Crimea. The reason for this was that with the onset of summer and the increase in water demand, the Russian authorities in Crimea increased the discharge of water from the Belogorsk Reservoir into the Biota River for the needs of southeastern Crimea, which led to an accelerated drop in the water level in the reservoir. Currently, the Belogorsk Reservoir is one of the most filled among the Crimean reservoirs. On the Crimean peninsula annexed by Russia, a critical situation with the filling of reservoirs is developing due to drought. Shallowing and then drying up of rivers on the Crimean peninsula began to be recorded practically from the end of spring and the beginning of summer. On June the 1st, Russian authorities declared a regional natural emergency in 8 districts of Crimea due to drought. In such difficult conditions, many people living in Crimea are ready to leave. This situation poses a threat to Russia. There are even such ideas that Russia will hand over Crimea to Ukraine without fight in the future. Russian expert Vladimir Osechkin said that Putin fears most of all a repeat of the raid similar to the one organized by Prigozhin in 2023. If he ends the war in Ukraine, the risk of armed people going to overthrow the Kremlin increases significantly. First, the human rights activist sobered us up with the truth about Putin's plans. It seems to me that we all need to part with the illusion that Putin and his army can voluntarily lay down their arms, leave the occupied territories, or stop seizing more and more new territories. As I have said many times on your broadcasts, Putin's main fear is to see a relapse of the events that took place in June 2023 when the so-called Wagner PMC, several thousand heavily armed militants, went to Moscow. Then Vladimir Osechkin explained why the next raid on Moscow would be brought to a logical conclusion. For him, and for the generals of Lubyanka, the FSB and the FSO, a nightmare is if a couple of divisions, disappointed and realizing that they were led by the nose, take off and go towards Moscow. They will definitely not stop, because there is an obvious example with the falling Embraer with Utkin and the entire team of the top of the PMC Wagner who crashed together with the crew in August 2023. Accordingly, for him to press the emergency brake and stop now is to generate great risks. But it is not excluded that the military could overthrow the dictator due to Putin's Ukraine affair. Recently, Osechkin also named the moment when divisions will rush to Moscow. He answered the question of whether the Kremlin will make concessions in the context of Trump's ultimatum. No. This is the image of a besieged fortress surrounded by enemies. How can he create the illusion of a besieged fortress for decades, saying that the whole world wants to destroy Russia and that he will now say that he has changed his mind, that he was scared of Trump's ultimatum and is tying everything up? Of course not. The human rights activist explains why Putin cannot stop. They will continue to escalate. It is very convenient for them all. Putin has built a system of which he himself has now become a hostage. He has no freedom of choice and freedom to get out of this situation, because otherwise, if he makes sudden moves, then a group not like the Wagner PMC, several thousand people, most of them mercenaries, half of them prisoners, will go on the march. Divisions will rush in. This is what they are afraid of, and this is what the FSB will definitely not be able to cope with. Yes, Putin will continue to tell us that everyone around us is an enemy, how they are bound together by one chain, and how they need to protect some values and beliefs that they themselves do not adhere to. More blah 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 with intimidation and state terror of their own population in order to justify the problem with the economy with an impending, even greater disaster for the well-being of Russians. Vladimir Osechkin predicted Putin's further actions.
The fighters of the 425th Skala Battalion of the Ukrainian Armed Forces have captured 32 Russian soldiers in one of the settlements. The occupiers, seeing that resistance was futile against the Ukrainian fighters, threw down their weapons and surrendered. The prisoners stated that they had been forced into the Russian army and regretted their decision. The captured occupiers expressed their gratitude to the Ukrainian fighters for sparing their lives and taking them as prisoners.
Лише за один тиждень бійці 425-го полку на різних напрямках взяли в полон 32 окупанта. Тепер вони жаліються, як не хотіли воювати, як командири їх кинули, і як їм страшно.
Я из 8 человек дошел до точки только один. Я видел, как моих друзей разрывало на куски. Они до сих пор мне снятся.
Самое страшное – это смерть. Не вернуться домой, не увидеть маму, не увидеть сына.
Я пошел в военкомат подписывать контракт с целью вернуть водительское удостоверение. Сейчас думаю, что лучше бы почтальоном служил, на велосипеде ездил.
Меня на протяжении недели пытали, чтобы я подписал контракт. В это время я находился в СИЗО.
Когда мы сдались в плен, мы не пожалели ни на секунду, то, что мы сделали этот выбор.
Нам говорили за вас, то, что, блядь, вы такие все хуёвые, блядь, там. Как, ну еще я даже не знаю, а вот увидел все своими глазами, по-другому стало.
Из 20 человек дошло, может быть, человек 5, ну пусть 10 даже, пусть даже 10, и те 300-е.
Меня обманули, короче, наебали и объебали. Поедешь, Валера, на стройку. Ну, на стройку так на стройку. И вот такая у меня стройка.
Выжило вообще не знаю сколько, все без вести пропавшие.
Страшно видеть, как ребята погибают мучительной смертью из-за какого-то придурка в Кремле.
За месяц от нашей роты осталось 2 человека.